U.S. President Donald Trump says he will now impose a 50% tariff on copper imports. He made the declaration at a cabinet meeting in Washington, but it's unclear.
I believe the tariff on copper, we're going to make it 50%.
50%.
What he's doing there, Kelly, is he's going through all of those investigations that have been ongoing into sectoral tariffs.
Trump says 50% tariff on copper imports will begin August. First, Trump copper tariff announcement sends prices to record highs, $5.95.
Trump's 50% tariff on copper imports set to hit in August, and the shockwaves are already global. The moment President Trump uttered the words, "We're doing copper 50%, the global commodities market erupted. Within minutes, copper futures on the New York COMEX exploded to an unprecedented $5.95 per pound, marking a historic 13% single-day surge, the largest in the contract's trading history. That price spike widened the gap between U.S. and London Metal Exchange prices by over 25%, creating an arbitrage divide the industry has never seen before. At the heart of this shockwave is Canada's $9.3 billion copper corridor, which plays a critical role in supplying U.S. factories. Raw copper is extracted in provinces like Quebec and shipped to smelters in Asia before returning as refined metal for American manufacturing. Now, with a 50% import tariff looming over every pound re-entering U.S. borders, Ottawa stands at a painful crossroads: either absorb the punishing cost or pivot the entire supply chain away from U.S. buyers. Both options would reshape North America's copper ecosystem overnight. The impact on Main Street will be just as brutal. Analysts at Cox Automotive calculate that even a 25% copper levy is enough to tack on an extra $6,000 to the sticker price of a Canada-built vehicle. Should the full 50% tariff hit, that surcharge could blow past 5 figures. A nightmare scenario for automakers already fighting thin margins. So buckle up. In the next 14 minutes, we'll dissect Trump's pressure first, negotiate later strategy, walk through Ottawa's potential counterpunch, and ask the question Washington doesn't want to hear: are American voters willing to bankroll another trade war every time they buy a car or flip on a light switch? Just hours after Wall Street closed on July 10, Trump signed a Section 232 proclamation under the guise of national security. It declared that all refined copper imports, totaling 810,000 tons in 2024, would be subject to the 50% tariff starting August 1. This puts half of the U.S. copper supply under luxury car-level taxation. At the same time, the White House quietly pushed back the negotiating deadline from July 9 to August 1, giving Ottawa, Brussels, and Beijing just 3 weeks to scramble for side deals or accept the full brunt of the tariff. While the administration frames this as a protective measure for U.S. industry, trade experts call it classic economic brinkmanship: apply pressure, then bargain. Even before this copper bombshell, the U.S. average import duty had already crept up to 16%, its highest level since the Great Depression. The International Chamber of Commerce warns that once the copper duty hits, that figure could eclipse 20%, a number not seen in 90 years of trade history. Markets didn't wait for policy briefs. They exploded. Within 24 hours of the proclamation, COMEX copper futures surged more than 12%, hitting an all-time high of $12,330 per metric ton, as investors raced to price in the coming disruption. Shares of Freeport-McMoRan, America's top copper miner, saw a modest bump, but Canada's S&P/TSX Materials Index tumbled, revealing the asymmetric shock across the border. Canada, which refined roughly 1/4 of all copper imported by the U.S. last year, was the first to feel the aftershocks. Prime Minister Mark Carney immediately denounced the move, pledging to protect Canadian workers and industries through every available legal and diplomatic channel. From WTO litigation to hardline retaliation. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Ottawa began exploring a rapid pivot, rerouting Canadian copper concentrate directly to Asia. The private sector is already sprinting ahead. Teck Resources, one of Canada's largest miners, confirmed it had pre-booked warehouse and port capacity in Asia, ready to bypass U.S. buyers altogether. CEO Jonathan Price admitted the moment Trump lifted aluminum tariffs in March, the company activated its copper contingency plan. This isn't just about copper. It's a protectionist earthquake that could reshape entire North American supply chains. As we'll explore in the next segment, copper is the lifeblood of everything from electric vehicle assembly lines and national power grids to military-grade ammunition stockpiles. A 50% duty doesn't just raise prices, it throws sand in the gears of industrial production. And Trump's latest gamble might backfire. In just 48 hours, what began as a policy signature turned into a market-wide jolt. Copper futures shattered records. Automakers braced for massive input cost hikes. Ottawa's diplomatic teams began rallying allies. Meanwhile, Carney's next move could be a retaliatory strike or a full decoupling of Canada's copper trade from the United States, redrawing the global copper map permanently. Will Trump's 50% copper tariff create the leverage he's hoping for? Or ignite a metal war that pushes consumer inflation, destabilizes EV plans, and fractures allied trade partnerships? We're just getting started. Hit subscribe on Deep State, and ring the bell so you don't miss the full breakdown of how this copper standoff could become Trade War 2.0. Copper chaos, the 50% tariff shockwaves that could rewire global trade. Market veterans are calling it the most explosive price surge since the infamous Hunt brothers silver squeeze of 1980. And the fallout is spreading fast. As copper prices on the New York COMEX soared past $5.95 per pound in the wake of Trump's 50% import tariff announcement, the London Metal Exchange, LME, lagged behind, triggering an unprecedented arbitrage spread of nearly $1,600 per ton between the two exchanges. That price gap is so wide, it could fund a full smelting operation purely on cross-border trading profits. As copper prices explode, container routes are rerouted in real time. Warehouses in New Orleans report a stunning 40% surge in inbound copper cathode, as traders race to offload metal into the higher-priced U.S. market. At the same time, LME inventory tanks as physical supply flows westward, draining Europe of metal just as American contracts reach record highs. But the downstream effects are where the real economic damage begins. Every electric vehicle, EV, requires up to 80 kilograms of copper, 4 times more than a conventional gasoline-powered car. So for every 5-cent increase per pound, manufacturers see an additional $90 tacked onto the cost of a single vehicle. Multiply that by the thousands of units rolling out monthly from Tesla's Fremont facility or GM's Orion plant, and you're talking millions in added costs monthly before the tires even hit the road. Ford's procurement division has already issued early warnings to suppliers, brace for August invoices to include significant pass-through charges on copper components. And the timing couldn't be worse. Back-to-school season triggers a wave of retail and utility spending, and now, grid expansion planners are feeling the heat too. Each mile of high-voltage transmission line requires nearly 5 tons of copper, making even modest projects suddenly hundreds of millions more expensive. Utilities, caught off guard, are now weighing rate hikes or delayed timelines on infrastructure upgrades meant to support America's energy transition. Across the border, Canada is moving with lightning speed to sidestep the tariff trap. Teck Resources is accelerating a contingency plan to ship raw copper concentrate directly to South Korean smelters, bypassing American refiners entirely. In a bold financial pivot, the company is now hedging the refined output on the Shanghai Futures Exchange, effectively cutting U.S. demand out of the pricing equation. Ottawa's trade minister told Parliament that every response, from WTO filings to retaliatory tariffs, is on the table. But insiders close to the matter say the real strategy is speed, not saber-rattling. Canada's priority is now clearly to reroute trade eastward and secure long-term alternatives before the next tariff volley hits. Meanwhile, Wall Street analysts are sketching dire scenarios. If the transatlantic premium on copper stays above $1,000 per ton through September, UBS estimates that U.S. manufacturers will eat an additional $4.2 billion in costs this quarter alone. That hit could shear 0.5 percentage points off Q4 GDP, a blow few can afford in an already inflation-weary economy. Ironically, this tariff, meant to strengthen U.S. supply security, could end up doing the opposite. Exporting both metal and economic growth while leaving American factories saddled with historic bills. All the while, Canada rewires its copper future with Asia racing ahead to embed itself deeper into East Asian supply chains. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Just days earlier, on June 30th, Prime Minister Mark Carney had offered what many saw as a peace gesture. Ottawa scrapped its 3% digital services tax, a measure expected to generate $5.9 billion Canadian dollars over 5 years, in a last-minute bid to restart stalled trade talks with Washington and meet the July 21 negotiation deadline. For a moment, it looked like compromise was possible. But less than a week later, the same White House that welcomed Carney's tax repeal came back swinging with a 50% copper tariff. As if that weren't enough, the U.S. also threatened a 200% duty on pharmaceutical imports if no agreement is signed before August 1. That move hit Canada where it hurts. According to U.S. Geological Survey data, Canada is the second largest source of refined copper for the U.S., accounting for 17% of all imports in 2024. Much of that metal doesn't even begin or end in North America. It starts as or in British Columbia, travels across the Pacific to smelters in Japan, China, or South Korea, and then returns in refined form to power America's industrial machines. By targeting copper routed through Asia, Trump's tariff gums up every link in the North American supply chain, punishing both allies and domestic manufacturers alike. Auto analysts calculate that with the new duty in place, the copper surcharge alone adds $220 per EV, with no substitute sources ready to fill the gap domestically. Canada's first counter isn't a war cry, it's a redirect. Teck Resources is now funneling concentrate eastward. Meanwhile, Quebec officials are flying to Lima and Santiago to scout out new buyers and smelters in Peru and Chile, should American doors close entirely. In private, lobbyists hint that Ottawa might even waive export permit fees, effectively subsidizing miners to sell overseas in order to keep the mines running and avoid mass layoffs. While Carney's office maintains that retaliation is on the table, the pace of events suggests Canada's true power play is restructuring, not retaliation. The faster it can link copper to East Asian markets, the sooner it can become an indispensable partner in the world's green transition, leaving Washington behind in the dust of its own tariffs. Stay tuned as we dive into the next shockwave, how this copper war could spiral into tariffs on lithium, nickel, and EV batteries, putting North America's entire electrification plan in jeopardy. Don't forget to subscribe to Deep State and ring the bell so you never miss a critical geopolitical and economic update. Copper crisis countdown, Canada scrambles as U.S. tariff deadline looms. Even the most optimistic officials now concede that WTO litigation is a slow weapon in a fast-moving war. Legal processes will take years, far too late to blunt the immediate blow of Trump's 50% copper tariff. Meanwhile, the impact is already rippling through construction sites, data centers, and grid modernization contracts across the continent. Canada finds itself trapped at the epicenter of America's renewed protectionist storm, too economically entangled to pull away, too vulnerable to stay still, and now racing the clock to reroute its $9 billion copper lifeline before Washington's next tariff becomes locked in law. This pivot is no longer theory. It's happening in real time. On March 31st, Statistics Canada reported a sharp shift. Exports to non-US markets surged 24.8%, while sales to the US fell 6.6%, the widest trade divergence in nearly a decade. Overnight, the North American trade map redrew itself. The public is noticing. On March 6th, Global News aired a Montreal street poll where frustrated shoppers pledged to boycott US goods, reigniting the buy Canadian sentiment last seen during the 2018 metals war. Markets see an exit forming. At 6:25 a.m. on July 10th, S&P futures ticked upward amid whispers of a new ASA free trade deal, potentially anchoring fresh copper and agricultural exports in South Asia and the Middle East. Yet Ottawa's deterrent remains locked and loaded. Prime Minister Mark Carney's tariff retaliation list, worth $125 billion Canadian dollars in U.S. imports, sits in standby mode, set to trigger at 12 o'clock and 1 second a.m. on July 22nd, should the White House fail to reverse course. That fuse could torch more than just the copper trade. Bay Street analysts warn that such a move could shave 4% off U.S. exports to Canada, with major industries caught in the crossfire. The sticker shock is already hitting wallets. On March 31st, Reuters cited Cox Automotive, warning U.S. car dealers that vehicles built in Windsor or Monterey now carry up to $6,000 in added costs when copper tariffs stack alongside steel and aluminum duties. Even U.S.-made trucks aren't spared. A Detroit pickup now absorbs roughly $3,000 in new material costs before labor or logistics are factored in. Homebuyers feel the squeeze next. CoreLogic's February housing brief revealed that tariffs on metals and lumber have added $17,000 to $22,000 to the average price of a new single-family home, often erasing entire down payments for first-time buyers. The National Association of Home Builders backed that up in a May 1 survey, pegging the material surcharge at $10,900 per new home. Just 4 months into the tariff regime. The result, groundbreakings are stalling from Arizona to Ohio, halting projects mid-plan as costs become unmanageable. Add all those impacts together, and the message is clear: every American household is now underwriting a trade war on 4 wheels and 4 walls. Analysts at J.P. Morgan estimate that if copper prices remain above $12,000 per ton through September, the combined drag from auto and housing sectors could shave half a percentage point off Q4 GDP. That is the growing economic bill, ticking upward by the hour, as Ottawa accelerates its pivot eastward to secure new buyers and shipping routes for its copper exports. Imagine walking into a car showroom where every sedan is suddenly $6,000 more expensive. And the reason, spelled out clearly on the price tag, is a single word: tariffs. That is the ripple effect of Trump's copper war. In just 2 weeks, we've witnessed copper futures smash all-time highs. Canada reroute its copper supply chain through Asia. US automakers and home builders tacking thousands onto their price sheets, but the final act hasn't played out yet, and now the calendar rules the crisis. If Ottawa launches its $125 billion Canadian countermeasure at midnight on July 22, this trade war will expand beyond metals, ensnaring pharmaceuticals, grid tech, semiconductors, and smartphone components. The economic battlefield will widen from refineries to retail, and homes to hospitals. And yet, the White House still holds the off switch. Will Washington de-escalate to protect consumers and preserve its alliances, or double down and gamble that voters will accept higher prices in exchange for security? The next 10 days will determine whether North America rebuilds a 1930s-style tariff wall or forges a modern deal that keeps copper, cars, and credibility flowing across borders. What do you think is coming? A last-minute handshake or an all-out showdown? Drop your forecast in the comments. Your take might just predict tomorrow's headline. And don't forget to subscribe to Deep State and ring the bell for the latest in political economic warfare.